You know that feeling, right? When you're really drawn to something, like you just have to have it or do it. Or maybe the opposite, something you just want to get away from.
Absolutely. It's like these fundamental pulls and pushes.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
feels like this deep internal thing.
Mhm.
And these powerful feelings, attraction, repulsion, let's call them love and hate. They're not just background noise, are they? They seem to shape pretty much everything we do, our choices, even what we believe.
Yeah. That's spot on. These basic emotions, they're really the primary drivers behind why humans do things. We're always kind of moving towards what we value, what we desire, and, away from what we don't. It's really baked into how we operate.
Right. And that's what brings us to today's deep dive. We're going to explore how these really core forces, love, desire, connect up with something maybe even deeper, our faith.
Mhm.
We're digging into the insights from the principle of love and desire by Shaykhul-Islam Ahmad ibn Taymiyyah.
Yeah, this is a really fascinating work. It really tries to get to the roots of human motivation and then looks at how those motivations kind of intersect with our spiritual lives, our understanding of religion.
It gives you a framework almost for seeing how our natural inclinations, our feelings, shape our religious life.
Exactly, a comprehensive way of looking at it.
Now, for you, our listener, always keen on getting knowledge quickly, but, thoroughly, you actually shared this text with us. So our mission today is to unpack its main arguments.
Right.
We want to see how love and desire aren't just fleeting feelings, but according to this text, the actual foundation for why we do what we do, especially regarding faith. We'll be navigating some, let's say, potentially complex ideas, but the aim is to keep it clear, focused on the core insights.
Absolutely. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he covers a lot of ground in this book, from the basics of love and hate to
Mhm.
how they drive actions, the nature of pleasure, ultimately the love of Allah. He even gets into debates with philosophers and offers critiques.
Mhm.
So yeah, our job is to really grasp that foundational role of love and desire in religious life as he lays it out.
Okay, so the book kicks off with a really basic idea about motivation. What's the sort of central point right at the start?
Well, the core principle is essentially this. Every single action we take, everything we do, starts with either love or desire. And conversely, when we don't do something, that inaction comes from hate or dislike.
Hmm.
The text puts it super clearly, something like, no living person would leave something they desire unless it was for something they desire more.
That really hits home, doesn't it? Like choosing to get up early for work, even though you desire sleep more in that moment. Oh, wait, no, you desire the job or the money more than the sleep. Okay.
Exactly. You trade one desire for a stronger one.
So how does this basic idea then connect to religion?
Well, Ibn Taymiyyah's argument is pretty straightforward. If all our actions spring from love and desire, then these emotions must be absolutely fundamental to religion itself. He kind of suggests that, look, any group of people needs something to unite them, right? And for humanity, that unifying force is often religion, a shared system of beliefs that builds community.
And he says every religion needs certain core components.
Precisely. According to the text, you need two main things for any religion. First, a belief system, what people should believe. And second, a sharia, a system of laws, practices that guide their actions.
So the rules and the beliefs.
Right. And these provide the structure, the channels through which that love and desire get expressed within a religious context.
Now, Ibn Taymiyyah wasn't just focused inward on religious texts. He also took aim at some philosophical views, didn't he? What were his main critiques there?
Yeah, he did. The text criticizes what it calls naturalistic philosophers. From Ibn Taymiyyah's perspective, these thinkers didn't really grasp the deeper wisdom or the ultimate purpose behind creation.
What specifically did he challenge?
Well, one key area was their understanding of enjoyment or pleasure. He contrasted their views with the Islamic perspective. The idea here is that while, yes, we experience pleasures in this life, and they can even help rectify us or push us towards good,
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate, the real lasting pleasure is reserved for the hereafter.
Okay, and this is interesting. How did he actually argue against these philosophical ideas? What was his method?
Well, a really key part of his approach was sort of using their own logic against them.
Yeah.
He pointed out what he saw as a basic inconsistency. How could something that's created be its own creator or its own ultimate purpose?
Right, like a tool doesn't make itself.
Exactly. Think about a painting, it didn't paint itself, right?
Okay.
And its purpose isn't just to be a painting existing in a vacuum. There was an artist and intention. So similarly, Ibn Taymiyyah argues for a creator and a higher purpose for everything, something beyond just the purely natural explanations these philosophers were offering.
Okay, let's shift now to a concept that's absolutely central in Islam, Tawhid, the oneness of Allah. How does this whole principle of love fit into that?
This is crucial. The text really emphasizes that the love of Allah is the very bedrock, the foundation of Tawhid, especially Tawhid in our actions. It's the basis for what's called deification, basically, worshiping Allah alone, not setting up any partners alongside him.
So our love is what directs our worship exclusively to God.
Precisely.
And worship itself, ibadah, it's not just rituals in this view, is it?
No, not at all. It's defined here as the most complete, the highest form of love, combined with the most complete form of submission. That blend, deep love and willing submission, that's essentially the meaning of Islam itself. Total surrender, driven by love.
Okay, that naturally makes you think about the opposite. Shirk, associating partners with Allah. How does love help us understand shirk?
Well, the text explains that the root of what it calls practical shirk in our actions, is loving other things or other beings in the same way, or sometimes even more than one loves Allah.
Okay.
It actually points to a verse in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, that talks about people who take rivals beside Allah and love them just like they should love Allah. But then it says, those who truly believe have a much stronger love for Allah. So the intensity and crucially, the direction of our love is key.
He also talks about this concept of kulla. I think it's often translated as like utmost friendship, intimate friendship.
That's right, kulla.
Why is that level of connection considered exclusive to Allah?
Kulla represents the absolute highest degree of love and closeness you can possibly have. It's an incredibly intimate bond. And Ibn Taymiyyah explains that because it's so intense, so complete, you can't have that level of connection with Allah and someone else simultaneously. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, even said something like, if he were to take a Khalil, this utmost friend from mankind, it would have been Abu Bakr. But, he clarified, his Khalil is Allah. It just highlights how unique and supreme that love for the divine is meant to be.
So it sounds like truly loving Allah isn't just, a warm feeling. It has very real, practical consequences for how you live.
Oh, absolutely. It has to.
Yeah.
Truly loving Allah means you start aligning your own loves and hates with what he loves and hates. The text even mentions a hadith, a saying that the most trustworthy sign of real faith, iman, is loving for Allah's sake and hating for Allah's sake.
Wow.
So yeah, our affection should be guided directly by our faith.
Now, you mentioned different groups. Within the Muslim community itself, there have apparently been varied understandings of al-muhabba, of love. What does this text clarify about the, let's say, correct Islamic understanding?
Right. The text does address some differing interpretations of muhabba that were around, and it also touches on debates about ish, which can mean intense passion, maybe even bordering on obsessive love. What it stresses is that love and desire can basically be categorized. Are they directed towards things Allah approves of or not? If they align with his pleasure, they lead to good things, righteousness, benefit, praise. If they don't align, well, they lead to harm, corruption, misery.
And there's clear guidance about following the divine law, the Sharia, in relation to these desires. It's not a free-for-all.
Definitely not. That's a critical point. There's an obligation to stick to the Sharia and a strict prohibition against following desires that go against it. The text brings in Quranic verses here, emphasizing the command to follow the revealed path and not get led astray by ignorance or just, unchecked whims.
Right.
There's even a really strong warning against letting your own desires become like a god to you, basically taking precedence over God's guidance.
The text also gets into the role of Shaitan, of Satan, and how he kind of exploits our desires, especially when they go wrong. How does that work, according to this view?
Yeah, Ibn Taymiyyah explains that Shaitan particularly likes this al-ishq, this excessive, uncontrolled passion. He points out how people who get consumed by these kinds of intense desires can effectively become allies of Shaitan.
Really?
Yeah, potentially leading them into shirk, or into actions that Allah really hates. So that unchecked passion can become a dangerous gateway.
And this sounds like it could actually change a person's fundamental nature, their innate disposition.
That's exactly the point. Corrupt love, corrupt desires, they could distort the fitra. That's the natural, pure disposition towards good that Allah is said to have created mankind upon. It's mentioned in the Quran.
Okay.
And furthermore, the text makes it clear. Loving the enemies of Allah is basically incompatible with truly loving Allah himself. It cites another verse to back that up. Our loyalties, our affections, they need to reflect that primary love for the divine.
Okay, then the text talks about different levels of love for Allah and His Messenger. Can you break those down?
Sure. It outlines two main levels. First, there's the obligatory level. This means loving Allah and His Messenger more than absolutely anything else. And, crucially, avoiding everything that Allah hates. That's the baseline.
Got it.
Then there's the supererogatory level. This is like the next step up. It's about making this love the absolute driving force behind all your actions, really striving wholeheartedly in God's cause, foremost in everything.
And there are consequences if you don't get the priority right.
Yes. The text warns pretty strongly about prioritizing worldly things, family, wealth, business, over the love of Allah and His Messenger. He references a powerful verse from Surah At-Tawbah about that.
Let's switch gears a bit to talk about pleasure and enjoyment in Islam. Sometimes you hear this idea that maybe worldly pleasures are inherently bad or only for non-believers. What does this text say?
That's a common misconception it addresses. The text clarifies that while, yes, the ultimate, perfect, lasting pleasure is definitely in the hereafter,
Right.
pleasures in this world can actually serve a good purpose. They can help us live, well, fulfilling and righteous lives. It challenges that idea that worldly enjoyment is only for disbelievers. Instead, it frames blessings in this life as a test.
A test? How so?
A test requiring gratitude, thankfulness. There's even a mention of a hadith where the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Allah is pleased with a servant who praises him after eating or drinking. So gratitude for everyday blessings is important. The text does also briefly mention that scholars differed on whether a disbeliever's enjoyment could be considered a true blessing in the same religious sense. Bit of nuance there.
Okay. The deep dive also mentioned the importance of walaya, allegiance, and adawa, enmity. How do these connect back to love and hate?
It's pretty direct, actually. The text explains that the foundation of allegiance walaya is basically love and agreement, finding common ground. Well, the foundation of enmity adawa is rooted in hatred and disagreement or differing.
Makes sense.
And it stresses the need for believers to have mutual love, to stick together as a community, and also to clearly distinguish themselves from those who reject faith. This principle also guides interactions. Cooperate in righteousness, but avoid cooperating in sin and transgression.
Okay, one last piece here. Knowledge. How does knowledge fit into this picture with love and desire?
Right, knowledge. Ibn Taymiyyah categorizes knowledge into two types. There's affective knowledge, knowledge that actually leads you to do something, and then affected knowledge, knowledge that stirs up feelings, either love or hate.
I see.
He argues that both kinds of knowledge are deeply intertwined with our emotions. But ultimately, the text emphasizes that knowledge and desire are primarily connected with what already exists, and they're part of our fitjala, our innate disposition.
Which is?
Which is, fundamentally, to worship Allah alone, based on both understanding knowledge and love.
Okay, wow. So, for you, our listener, really tuning in here, let's try to pull out some of the absolute key takeaways from this deep dive into the principle of love and desire. First off, it seems incredibly clear that love and desire, they aren't just background noise.
Not at all.
They are the fundamental engines driving everything we do, everything we believe.
Absolutely. And just understanding that can help us, look a bit deeper at our own motivations. Why do we make the choices we make?
Yeah. Second, the absolute centrality of loving Allah in Islam. It just jumps out. This love isn't just like an abstract feeling. It's meant to direct our worship, our loyalties, even what we actively avoid.
Exactly. And like we said, it forms the very core of Tawhid, that foundational belief.
Third, we definitely saw the warnings about where love can go wrong, misdirected love, unchecked desires, how they can pull us off track, even towards something as serious as shirk.
Recognizing those dangers is pretty crucial, isn't it, for staying sincere?
For sure. And lastly, that perspective on worldly pleasure, that it's not inherently bad, but it's a test requiring gratitude. It offers a more balanced way to think about enjoying life's good things without getting, unhealthily attached.
Right. It reminds us that all good comes from Allah, ultimately, and we should be thankful for it.
Here's something that kind of clicked for me during this discussion. Even when we dislike something, it's still driven by a type of desire, isn't it? The desire to avoid whatever we see as negative.
That's a really sharp point, yeah.
It just shows how pervasive this principle of love and desire really is. It shapes our whole experience, attraction, and aversion. And it really highlights how vital it is to constantly check our my loves and hates align with what Allah loves and hates.
That's a great way to put it. It shows the underlying consistency. Whether we're moving towards something or trying hard to get away from it, it's all rooted in that same mechanism of desire.
So, Thinking practically then, how does knowing all this actually help us day to day? I mean, how can we use these ideas without getting totally overwhelmed trying to analyze every single desire?
Well, I think understanding these principles gives us a kind of lens, right?
Mm,
A framework for making more conscious choices. It helps us prioritize based on, hopefully, divine guidance, rather than just chasing every fleeting impulse.
yeah.
It helps navigate relationships, navigate our faith, with a clearer standard.
He's con-
Is this rooted in the love of Allah and His messenger? By trying to ground our core motivations in that ultimate love, maybe we can find more clarity and not feel so pulled in a million directions by conflicting desires.
That makes sense. Okay, so on that note, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe chew on. Considering that, according to this text, all our actions are rooted in love and desire, what does the object of our deepest love truly reveal about our ultimate priorities? About how we understand ourselves and the world? It's definitely something worth reflecting on. Maybe even going back to some of these ideas we've talked about.
That's a profound question, definitely. Really encourages some deep thinking about where our hearts are truly invested.